On today's Newsmakers, a Holocaust survivor speaks out, revival in Hollywood, and inspiring second chances. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we begin with a conversation with Jack Werfel. Jack is a Holocaust survivor, and he knows more than anyone firsthand the absolute horror that can come from anti-Semitism. He joins us today to respond to campus protests and anti-Israel sentiment. Let's welcome Jack to the show to break it all down. Jack, you are a Holocaust survivor, and you have told your story to me before. It's an incredibly moving story, but there's a lot going on in the world right now, in America and across the globe, a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-Israel sentiment. What has it been like to watch these things unfold?
Well, I think it's pretty terrible for people like myself to watch this, because the last Holocaust back in Hitler's regime started for certain reasons also. This is just another reason that could eventually possibly end up, cause a similar problem. And I just hope it doesn't, but, one has to think about it. And it's kind of frightening, It's a terrible thing to think about.
I was just going to say to you, a lot of people are looking at what is happening on college campuses. They're watching these protests, and even Benjamin Netanyahu, has said this is reminiscent of things that were seen before the Holocaust. They say history repeats itself, which is, a common phrase. And yet here we are, we're watching this. You've written a book about your story and your life. It's called My Two Lives. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things. But before we get to some of the current events, help us understand, because for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about how your family and your life, and I know this is a broad question, but I'm going to throw it to you, how you were affected personally by what Hitler did and by the Holocaust.
Yeah, well, the worst thing was I lost my entire family. I lost my father, who had become a political prisoner and was at Sachsenhausen in the concentration camp. And my mother was arrested by the Gestapo and the SS, and she was taken to Auschwitz, and she was killed there. And then all my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my nephews, everybody in my family eventually was killed during that period of time. So that the only people who survived the war in that period of time was my brother Peter and myself.
Wow. As you're describing that, it's unimaginable. Anybody who's listening to this or watching this, thinking about their own family, their own parents, their brothers, their sisters, to have your entire family wiped out over just sheer hatred. When you look at what's happening today and you reflect back on what already happened, not just in the Holocaust, obviously events that preceded that in history, but the Holocaust being the most recent horror before October 7th, what do you think drives this irrational hatred of the Jewish people?
Well, that's a very good question. I've been asking that all my life. I say, what is anti-Semitism? I know what the word means, but why? Why? Why do we hate the Jews so much, I think every country where the Jews lived in past centuries, those countries actually benefited from the Jewish people living there. But eventually they were thrown out or they had to leave. It's just very, very hard to believe. I think the Jewish people as a whole are very industrial people. They are very educated, conscious of good education for their children and for their families. And they work very hard and they like to be successful. And in many cases, they are very successful. And I just don't understand where this hate is coming from. What are the Jewish people doing that is so horrible? I mean, right now we have these things going on in the colleges. Yeah, you know, they see thousands of people dying in Palestinian. But why? The Jews never started a war. They never have started a war. And here again, Hamas is the one who started it. What were the Jews supposed to do? Are they supposed to sit back like they did during Hitler days and let them come in and just slaughter them and kill them? They never fought really against Hitler in those days, except maybe a little bit in Warsaw during the Warsaw Ghetto. Otherwise, they never really fought the Germans. And the Jews never had their own country, which was one of the things that why they were always kicked out and thrown out wherever they lived. And here, and after the war was over, and people came back from these concentration camps, people were so upset about all of this that anything like this would happen. And they all decided, the United Nations decided in 1948 that the Jews should have their own country. And this was their promised land. So they gave the Jews the country which they called Israel, and that is their country. And you know what? They are not going to give it up again. This time, they're not going to lay back and let everybody kill them. They're going to fight. And they're going to fight to the last soul, the last person. That's my opinion, at least, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, this is a story, the book is My Two Lives, that people need to pick up. They need to read it. They can see what you went through, and you've built an incredible life for yourself, you know, in America after going through unthinkable things, losing your family. And I just so appreciate you joining us, taking us through your thoughts on this. I think you're the perfect person for us to hear from in the midst of so much misinformation, disinformation. Jack, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, absolutely. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to talk to you about it, and hopefully other people will hear about it and will understand what happened to families like mine.
You can read more about Jack's story in his book, My Two Lives, wherever books are sold. We'll be back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Our next guest is actress Candace Cameron Bure. She is joining us to talk about her new film, Unsung Hero. She also has a lot to say about revival in Hollywood. Let's welcome Candace to Newsmakers. So Candace, Unsung Hero is your latest project. This is a really unique one. How did you come into this project?
Well, you know, this is a true story about the Smallbone family. You might know them from For King and Country or Rebecca St. James. And I've known the Smallbones for about 8 years now. I actually met them when they performed live on The View while I was a co-host. And we've kept in touch over the years. We've done some things together, and they're such an incredible family. And a couple of years ago, they came to me and said, hey, we want to tell our family's story. And we set up a meeting. They sent me the script, and my company was the first company to sign on as a production company. And I devoured the script. It is such a compelling story. It's so beautiful. And I wanted to share it with the world. These are the types of stories that I'm always looking for, and that I know that families and people want to watch, that are positive and not only encouraging, but to see the reality of the struggles and to have hope to come through it on the other side. And this is what this story is all about. And so I was like, I am all in every aspect, as a producer, with my company, and as an actor.
Yeah, well, and I was just going to say, because kind of pulling back, you're doing a lot of really interesting things, right? You're podcasting, you're making movies, and you are, an executive at a network. I mean, there's a lot happening for you, and this idea of telling stories that matter, that leave people with something, right? Even beyond family, just
Yeah.
something that is bigger than themselves. You just spoke to it a little bit, but why does that matter to you? Why is that so important for you in your life and career?
I have wonderful parents that modeled family really well for us. And again, it's not to say that we were anywhere near a perfect family or had it all together. We didn't. But my mom and dad made our family the number one priority. And so that was instilled in me. And I see the value of it now as a mom, as a parent, as a woman who's been married for almost 28 years. And I feel like we've just become a society that it's kind of easy to lose focus. The going gets hard and we just quit and leave. And to see something modeled so beautifully and saying, no, there's actually like beauty in the ashes, that there's something that can come out that's so beautiful, but you have to work through the hard parts to get there. Just like a diamond in coal, right? Like there's a struggle before it becomes really beautiful. And I think that's what family does for all of us.
Yeah. And I think too, having people like you, sort of coming out of Hollywood and joining in on that, and then having the people who started it 10, 15 years ago and really didn't know what they were doing and now have learned and grown and they're making incredible things. There's sort of two things going on at the same time that I think are really fun to watch, is just that craft growing and all of it coming together. And now Hollywood offering this, right? When it wasn't being offered, it was easy to say there's no market. Well, now we know there's a huge market for it, right?
Yeah.
Because people are showing up. I think when it comes to Hollywood, one of the other interesting trends, and we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's worth talking about again because we continue to see it, people in Hollywood finding Jesus. I mean, actors, singers, people who maybe they haven't even arrived there yet, but they're showing interest. They're talking about this relationship that they want to have. What has it been like for you to watch that increasingly happen in the midst of such a chaotic culture?
It's one of the most exciting things for me to watch. I feel like I'm sitting on the sidelines, that I'm sitting in the stands of a hockey game and it's the playoff game and it's game 7, or maybe it's a football game and it's the Super Bowl. And it's just like, come on, baby, come on. And you just like, it's like goal, score. I mean, when you see these people that have massive market appeal or celebrity, and that doesn't diminish anyone else, but to see it being vocalized in Hollywood is just like, I am cheering it along. It is incredible to me, especially people that you wouldn't have even thought that faith, they would even consider faith. And then to see them all out for Jesus, you're like, only God could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not always easy, right? I mean, it's not always an easy thing to do, and yet you've shown up consistently. And by the way, what you were saying about your parents before, I mean, look, your parents are clearly incredible people. They raised 2 child stars who became adult stars who are incredibly amazing people, which is a very rare thing to happen with one, let alone 2 kids. One thing we didn't ask you, and I want to make sure I don't forget to ask you this, your character, going back to Unsung Hero, Kay, tell us a little bit about Kay.
So Kay is, she's a real person. She's actually the real Miss Kay. Her first name's Kay. She has a different last name, but she's a little bit of a mashup between a couple of other people that were in their lives. They kind of made her into one character, but her and her husband played an integral part in the Small Bones lives, in that with church and their community, they acted like the hands and feet of Jesus. They provided a lot for them, which answered their prayers. And they also saw something in the Small Bone family that's like, you have something right in front of you with your children that I don't think you quite realize, which was their musical talent. And so they played a big part in encouraging them and also helping them. And there's some really beautiful moments with them in the movie.
Well, I love that and appreciate you joining us. The film is Unsung Hero, comes out April 26th. Thanks so much, Candace.
Thank you, guys.
Find out more about Unsung Hero at unsunghero.movie. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we recently caught up again with Heather Rice-Minus. She is the president and CEO of Prison Fellowship, and she reflects on second chances. Why are people entitled to them? How important it is for people of faith to make sure that people coming out of prison can start fresh. Let's welcome Heather to Newsmakers. Well, Heather, I want to thank you for coming on today. The starting point here that I really want to get into, a lot of times we'll hear people say things like, oh, inmates will never change, prisoners don't change. Why is it important to not dismiss the incarcerated?
Well, I think for us as believers, we have to remember this is what we're called to believe about everybody, regardless of their circumstance. So I think of 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, anyone who's in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. So if we believe in the message of grace, if we believe in the message of redemption, then we have to believe it not just selectively, but for everyone. And so that includes people who are in prison. And it doesn't mean everyone will change, right? But it does mean that as Christians, we're supposed to believe that through Christ, anyone can change, and through Christ that can happen. And so that's one of the most beautiful messages of the gospel, is that we don't earn it. It's all through the power of Christ. And so I think it's a great time of year, coming off of Easter, to remember that the power of the cross is there for everybody.
Yeah, and the work you do at Prison Fellowship obviously celebrates that potential for change, and you see so much of the change. I mean, imagine if we held the Apostle Paul to the same standard of people don't change, right? I mean, there's so many people in Scripture, but we obviously, as Christians, we think a lot about Paul and who he was, essentially murderous, turning Christians over, holding cloaks while people are being stoned, and he becomes one of the most transformative people in all of Christianity. So it's important that we look at giving people second chances, and Prison Fellowship, that kind of brings us to April, Second Chance Month. Talk a little bit about what this stands for.
Yes. So Second Chance Month is a national campaign to raise awareness about how there are over 70 million Americans who have a criminal record. In fact, 1 in 2 Americans have or had a family member who has been incarcerated. So it's a really pervasive problem. And a lot of times people complete their punishment in prison or getting their criminal record and community supervision, whatever it may be that they have to comply by. They finish and they think they're done. But a lot of times people come out and they face a lot of challenges, things like restrictions on housing, employment, just struggling to get a job. So we want people to no longer commit crimes, but then we make it really hard for people to earn an honest living and provide for their families. And there's just a lot of stigma that comes with having a criminal record. So Billy, back in 2017, Prison Fellowship, I still remember the meeting we had with our marketing team. And we said, hey, there's a celebration that's been going on for a week of Reentry Week during April. We really want to claim the whole month of April as Second Chance Month, raise awareness about these challenges, and talk about how all of us, particularly us as Christians, know we have a God of second chances, and we should celebrate and support people in this. And I remember our marketing team said, can we just do that? Can we claim a month? And I said, well, let's try. And sure enough, we've been so grateful to see the swelling of support. It's really taken on a life of its own. We've had presidents in multiple administrations, over half governors across the country declare April as Second Chance Month through proclamations. We've had social media campaigns and events. So many good things have spun out of this. But that's what April as Second Chance Month is all about.
Yeah, you mentioned something that is really interesting, and I would imagine most people, obviously outside of the work that you do, are not thinking about this. You come out of, let's say you've had a life change, you've encountered Jesus, or you want to just change your life, right? You want to do the right thing. You come out of prison, you re-enter society and you have all of these barriers, and you mentioned a couple of them, but I mean, take us through maybe a nightmare scenario for somebody who really wants to fix their life. They come out of prison, and what are they facing? What are some of those big barriers for them?
Right. So it can be as simple as, for example, we had a woman who graduated from our Prison Fellowship Academy, and she wanted to come home, start fresh. She had really, tried to work on everything that brought her to prison. So she wanted to come back and really start fresh, but she just couldn't get access to a driver's license. Initially, there were some hurdles to do that in her state. And so it was really hard for her to get to her job, which took her several times to find a job that would hire her because of her criminal background. And so she had to work a shift that she could get a ride from a family member to get there. Meanwhile, she's trying to juggle parenting her kids who have been missing her while she's away. And, in the end, she ended up ending up back in jail and kind of reverted back to some of those ways. And I think some of that was just the pressure that was over her. But simple things like driver's licenses, having those, get access during prison, having employers understand the value that people who have a criminal record can bring. There's actually some studies showing that they're more loyal, that they're hardworking. And so making sure employers are really looking at what someone's done to rehabilitate, not automatically banning someone based on their background, and looking at the qualifications of the job and the previous crime committed. And, a lot of times there's not a nexus between those things, and someone can step into a new role. But that's just one example.
Well, I so appreciate you joining us again and breaking this all down. Where can people go if they want to get more information on the work that you're doing?
Yes, I would encourage people to come to prisonfellowship.org. You can also find Prison Fellowship on all kinds of social media. And on the website, just search for Second Chance Month, and you can get connected to ways you can get involved this April.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Billy.
Find out more about Prison Fellowship at prisonfellowship.org. We'll be right back with more Newsmakers after the break. That's all for today's Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. It's Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. We feature one interview every single day. You can subscribe to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And as for this show,